Marcus Hensley sat silently in the pew, just feet behind his mother, Marlene, unassuming, calm, and watching. But in a split second, the quiet son transformed into a nightmare that would shatter their small Georgia town forever. What unfolded next, caught live on Facebook, was a chilling act of violence that no one could have predicted, revealing dark secrets buried deep within their family, and a tragedy no one would ever forget. May 11, 2025 began like any other spring Sunday in Elmsbrook, Georgia, a town where neighbors still waved from porches and the church bell rang like clockwork at 10 sharp. The air was warm, the sky a soft pastel blue, and the sidewalks were scattered with petals from blooming dogwood trees. It was Mother's Day, a special occasion for many in the community. Families dressed in their Sunday best. Children clutched handmade cards, and restaurants had already begun filling with breakfast reservations for after the service. At the heart of it all stood New Hope Baptist Church, a white-steepled building that had served the town for over 70 years. It was more than just a place of worship. It was where people were baptized, married, and buried. Life in Elmsbrook revolved around it. Inside, the sanctuary buzzed with warm greetings and laughter. Churchgoers filtered in slowly, exchanging hugs, commenting on floral dresses, and admiring the flower arrangements placed in honor of mothers. Roses and lilies mostly, donated by the congregation. The choir, dressed in their usual navy robes, rehearsed quietly near the altar. Pastor Daniel Reed, a man known for both his deep voice and gentle sermons, stood at the front reviewing his notes, smiling politely at those who passed. Volunteers checked the camera setup for the Facebook Live broadcast, something the church had started during the pandemic and continued ever since. It allowed shut-ins and distant relatives to feel part of the service, even from miles away. At precisely 10:00 a.m., the stream went live. Viewers online saw the stained glass windows glowing in the morning sun, the choir beginning the opening hymn, and families settling into wooden pews. Among them was Marlene Hensley, sitting in her usual spot near the center aisle. She wore a pale pink dress and a simple silver necklace, her hair neatly pinned back. To those who knew her, she was the picture of faith and strength. Widowed early in life, she had raised her only son, Marcus, with quiet devotion and a strong moral foundation. She rarely missed a Sunday service and often led the Tuesday night prayer circle. Marcus arrived a few minutes later, alone. He slipped in quietly, choosing a pew just behind his mother, not sitting directly beside her. Most assumed he was just late or needed space. It wasn't unusual for young men his age to seem distant or detached during church. No one gave it a second thought. The choir finished their final notes, and Pastor Reed stepped forward to welcome the congregation. The camera captured it all: familiar faces, peaceful moments, a community united in faith. No one watching in person or online knew what was coming. No one could have predicted how this calm, beautiful morning would end in unimaginable horror. Marcus Hensley took his seat in the third row on the right side of the church, a few feet behind his mother. He wore a navy jacket, dark jeans, and a pair of scuffed sneakers. His face was unreadable, calm, expressionless, as if he were somewhere else entirely. Those who noticed him thought little of it. Marcus had always been quiet, the kind of person who kept to himself. To most of the congregation, he was simply Marlene's boy, the son who rarely smiled, rarely spoke, and never stayed long after service. Marlene, by contrast, was well known and deeply respected. A single mother who worked as a medical clerk at the town's small urgent care center, she had attended New Hope for more than 2 decades. She had a gentle way about her, always quick to offer support or a prayer. Though she didn't speak much about her personal life, it was clear she loved her son dearly. She often asked for prayers for him, quietly, discreetly, never going into detail but always with a mother's worry just beneath her words. That morning, she sat alone with her hands folded over her Bible, completely unaware of the storm brewing only a few feet behind her. The sermon began as usual. Pastor Reed's voice filled the room, warm and steady. He spoke about grace and redemption, tying it into the meaning of Mother's Day, how mothers reflect God's love through sacrifice and compassion. As he preached, the congregation listened intently. Some nodded, others closed their eyes in reflection. The children in the front row fidgeted. The choir sat quietly, hands folded in their lap. The Facebook live stream showed it all, capturing the serene atmosphere and the quiet reverence in the room. Marcus didn't sing during the hymns. He didn't bow his head during prayer. He sat, still, hands resting on his knees, staring ahead with a blankness that was almost unsettling. But no one paid much attention. In a room full of more than 70 people, small things often went unnoticed. There was a moment when Marlene turned slightly, as if to glance back. Whether she saw him or not is unclear. If she did, she didn't show any concern. The room carried on as it always did, filled with the rhythm of scripture and song, but behind the calm was a tension invisible to everyone. A fuse had been lit, and the spark was moving fast. The camera continued streaming. The world outside continued as normal, but inside the sanctuary, something was building. Something quiet, terrifying, and moments away from shattering everything. 28 minutes into the Facebook Live broadcast, as Pastor Reed spoke about the power of forgiveness, Marcus stood up from his seat without a word. His movements were slow and deliberate, almost too calm to raise alarm. Some churchgoers noticed, their eyes briefly shifting toward him, assuming he was heading to the restroom or stepping out for air. But instead of walking toward the aisle, Marcus turned and moved down the row, straight toward his mother. The room was quiet, the kind of stillness that only happens in moments of reflection. Pastor Reed's voice echoed softly from the front, layered with scripture and emotion. The camera, positioned near the pulpit, captured the moment in wide angle. At first it didn't seem like anything out of place. Then, in a sudden and horrifying flash, Marcus reached into the inside of his jacket and pulled out a small black handgun. He didn't shout. He didn't hesitate. Without breaking his stride, he raised the weapon and fired 2 shots at point-blank range. The first bullet hit Marlene in the chest, the second struck her in the side of the head. She collapsed instantly, slumping over the edge of the pew. Her Bible slipped from her lap and hit the floor with a soft thud, its pages fluttering open. The sanctuary exploded into chaos. Screams ripped through the air. Some people dropped to the floor, others ran toward the exits, knocking over hymnals and flowers in their pants. Children cried out, and elderly members stumbled as they tried to escape. The choir backed away from the altar in stunned disbelief. Pastor Reed stood frozen, the microphone slipping from his hand. The camera kept rolling. The live stream, still active on Facebook, showed the aftermath in real time. People watching from home stared in horror as the peaceful service turned into a nightmare. The footage quickly spread, first to local followers, then to wider audiences as users began screen recording and reposting it. Within minutes, the stream had gone viral. Back in the church, Marcus stood perfectly still. The gun dangled loosely in his hand, his face pale and expressionless. He made no attempt to run. He didn't speak. The silence around him was eerie, broken only by sobbing, distant sirens, and the quiet thud of footsteps retreating down the aisles. One of the deacons approached cautiously and called 911. By the time police arrived, Marcus had already placed the weapon on the floor and raised his hands. He surrendered without resistance. The Facebook stream cut off seconds later, and just like that, a sacred place became a crime scene. When the police arrived at New Hope Baptist Church, they found a scene that would haunt them for years. The sanctuary, once a place of peace, was in disarray. Flowers trampled, Bibles scattered, and pews left askew in the chaos of the evacuation. Marlene Hensley's body remained where she had fallen, slumped over and still. The sight was jarring not only because of the violence, but because of where it happened, a church. On Mother's Day, in front of her son, Marcus Hensley stood just a few feet away, unarmed and calm. He didn't speak as officers approached. He didn't cry or protest. He simply lowered himself to the floor, hands above his head, and complied with every order. One of the officers later described him as cold, like he was watching something from far away. There was no panic in his voice, no confusion, just a blank stare that gave away nothing. As he was taken into custody, members of the congregation gathered outside in clusters, many still trembling, holding one another, praying aloud. Some were too shocked to speak. Others were on their phones, trying to explain to family what had just happened. Some still watching the footage on Facebook, replaying it in disbelief. The video had already started circulating, copied and reposted before moderators could take it down. For many, the horror of the moment kept repeating, frozen on screens and burned into memory. Inside the sanctuary, investigators began their grim work. Yellow tape was stretched across the entrance. Crime scene photographers moved carefully between the pews, documenting everything. The gun, a compact 9mm pistol, was recovered from the floor near Marcus's seat. It was registered to Marlene, legally purchased years prior, and kept locked in a small safe at home. The fact that Marcus had taken it and brought it to church hinted at premeditation, though his motives remained unclear. Detectives started questioning witnesses immediately. They spoke with the pastor, the choir, and several members who had seen Marcus enter, sit alone, and later walk toward his mother. Everyone said the same thing. He was calm. Too calm. No one saw any warning signs. That evening, Elmsbrook was no longer just a quiet southern town. News vans arrived by the dozen, and national networks picked up the story. Reporters stood outside the church, delivering live updates as candles and flowers were placed along the sidewalk. Shock turned to grief, and grief slowly gave way to questions. Why did he do it? What was going through his mind? And perhaps most haunting of all, could it have been prevented? In the days following the shooting, attention turned to Marcus Hensley himself. Who was this quiet young man who had calmly walked into a church, sat behind his mother, and killed her in front of a crowd? Reporters, investigators scrambled for details. Former classmates, neighbors, and distant relatives were contacted. Everyone wanted to understand how a life that had seemed so unremarkable could lead to something so horrifying. Marcus had lived in Elmsbrook nearly his entire life. Born in 2005, he had grown up in a modest one-story home on Elm Street with his mother, Marlene. His father, according to town records and local memory, had died in a car accident when Marcus was very young. Most people remembered Marcus as a quiet kid, polite but distant. He wasn't involved in sports or clubs. He didn't get into trouble, but he also didn't stand out. Teachers described him as intelligent but emotionally flat. He did well enough in school, but there was always something off, something hard to define. As a teenager, Marcus became even more withdrawn. He spent most of his time at home, rarely going out except for errands or church services with his mother. He had no known friends and wasn't active on social media. While some chalked this up to shyness or introversion, others now wondered if it had been something deeper. After high school, Marcus worked briefly at a warehouse on the edge of town, but quit after just a few months. Since then, he had been unemployed, staying at home with Marlene. Investigators soon uncovered a key detail. 2 years earlier, Marcus had been briefly hospitalized for mental health issues. The visit, kept private at the time, involved a 3-day stay at a nearby psychiatric facility. According to records, he had been experiencing paranoia, religious delusions, and periods of emotional detachment. He had claimed he felt unreal and outside his body. Though he was released after being deemed stable, he never followed up with outpatient care. Marlene had reportedly managed his condition quietly, perhaps believing that keeping things normal would help him heal. There were no prior reports of violence, no criminal history, and no threats. That's what made the crime so incomprehensible. The suddenness of it, the quietness of Marcus's life before it, made it all the more chilling. People who had once pitied him for being lonely now felt unsettled by what that loneliness had hidden. Behind the quiet boy in the third row was a mind slowly unraveling, one that no one had fully seen until it was too late. As detectives continued their investigation, they turned their attention to the Hensley home. Located just a few blocks from the church, the small white house with its cracked driveway and overgrown hedges appeared unremarkable from the outside. But inside, officers quickly realized that something about Marcus's world was deeply abnormal. The house was clean but sparse, with minimal decorations. Marlene's touches were visible. Framed scripture verses, floral curtains, a wall calendar with handwritten reminders. Marcus's presence, however, felt different, cold, isolated. The attic, accessible through a pull-down ladder in the hallway, revealed the most disturbing clues. It wasn't used for storage like most homes. Instead, Marcus had transformed it into a personal hideaway. Investigators found a single folding chair, a small desk, and dozens of handwritten journals stacked neatly in plastic bins. The walls were covered with clippings, old sermons, religious quotes, newspaper headlines, and Bible verses, many underlined or circled in red ink. Several phrases were repeated over and over, scrawled in uneven handwriting. "The truth is buried. Her sins will find her," and "She stole my name." In one section of the attic wall, Marcus had drawn what looked like a timeline. It listed key moments in his life: his birth, his father's supposed death, his hospital stay, and then a large red box labeled "The Reveal, November 2024. Inside that box were notes about a DNA test. That discovery, it seemed, had set something in motion. Police also found printed emails from an ancestry website. 6 months before the shooting, Marcus had submitted his DNA out of curiosity. What he received in return shocked him. According to the test, his biological father was not the man Marlene had always spoken of. Instead, the results pointed to another name. Someone Marcus had never heard of. A man with a violent criminal history. A man who had died in prison while serving time for a brutal murder. This revelation appeared to unhinge Marcus completely. His journals took a darker turn around this time, filled with accusations and confusion. He wrote about betrayal, lies, and a mask his mother wore in public. In one entry, he described himself as the product of darkness, saying he had been raised on a lie. It was clear that Marcus believed his entire identity had been stolen from him, and that his mother was responsible. The attic, once just an empty space above a quiet house, now told the story of a young man who felt erased, a man unraveling in silence, a son convinced his mother was not who she claimed to be. The DNA test Marcus had taken in late 2024 became the turning point in the investigation. What began as a simple curiosity, a holiday promotion for a discounted ancestry kit, led to a discovery that shattered the fragile world Marcus lived in. Until that moment, he had believed what Marlene had told him his entire life, that his father had died in a car accident when Marcus was just a toddler. There had been no photos of him, no stories beyond vague mentions, just silence and a gravestone in a rural cemetery miles away. Marcus had accepted this story for years without question, but the DNA results told a different story. They revealed that Marcus's biological father wasn't the man buried under that headstone. Instead, his DNA matched with several people linked to a man named Warren Dale Langston, a convicted murderer who had died in prison in 2013. Langston's name sent a jolt through the research. He had been convicted in the early 2000s for a gruesome crime in Alabama involving the brutal killing of a young woman. News articles from that time were still archived online. Mugshots, trial coverage, obituaries. The man was no mystery, and he was Marcus's real father. Marcus became obsessed. Investigators discovered browser history on his laptop showing he had spent hours poring over old news stories about Langston. He searched through prison records, found photos, even tried to contact one of Langston's surviving siblings through social media. He didn't get a response, but it didn't matter. He had already made up his mind. To Marcus, this wasn't just a shocking revelation, it was a betrayal. Everything his mother had told him was now suspect. Every memory reshaped itself into something darker. In his journal, he wrote that he felt like a stranger in his own skin. "She lied to me every day," one entry read. "She raised me on a dead man's name. I didn't even know who I was." His writings began to show signs of delusion. He believed Marlene had deliberately hidden the truth to keep him weak, to erase half of him. Marlene had carried this secret alone for 2 decades, shielding Marcus from a history soaked in violence. But her silence, though rooted in love and fear, became the fuel for his unraveling. When Marcus discovered the truth, he didn't see it as protection, he saw it as deception. In his journals, he described his mother's transformation as a kind of mask. He believed she had lived a double life, preaching honesty and faith in public while hiding a monstrous truth at home. He wrote that her new identity was a lie built on top of another lie, and that by keeping his father's history a secret, she had stolen his right to decide who he was. The tragedy deepened. Marlene hadn't just lost her life to violence, she had spent it trying to escape it. In the end, it caught up with her not through a stranger or a criminal, but through the very person she had tried hardest to protect. Her greatest act of love became the very thing that destroyed her. As the community of Elmsbrook grappled with the shocking events, the question on everyone's mind was, why Marcus chose that particular moment to commit such a terrible act? Why kill his mother during a church service, in front of so many people, and on Facebook Live? The answer, investigators soon realized, was tied to a complex mix of Marcus's mental state, his obsession with the truth, and a deep desire for confrontation. Months before the shooting, Marcus had begun to withdraw even further from the world around him. Friends and neighbors noticed he stopped attending social events or even stopping by the local grocery store. In the end, it caught up with her not through a stranger or a criminal, but through the very person she had tried hardest to protect. Her greatest act of love became the very thing that destroyed her. As the community of Elmsbrook grappled with the shocking events, the question on everyone's mind was, why Marcus chose that particular moment to commit such a terrible act? Why kill his mother during a church service, in front of so many people, and on Facebook Live? The answer, investigators soon realized, was tied to a complex mix of Marcus's mental state, his obsession with the truth, and a deep desire for confrontation. Months before the shooting, Marcus had begun to withdraw even further from the world around him. Friends and neighbors noticed he stopped attending social events or even stopping by the local grocery store. Instead, he spent long hours locked in his attic sanctuary, consumed by his journals and the dark thoughts they contained. Those who tried to reach out to Marlene reported that she seemed exhausted, overwhelmed by her son's growing distance and agitation. In the weeks leading up to the shooting, Marcus's behavior became more erratic. He stopped answering calls from relatives and ignored messages from old acquaintances. Investigators uncovered messages on his phone that hinted at paranoia. He believed people were watching him, judging him, and that the church, his mother's sanctuary, was the place where everything would come to light. The service was, in his mind, the perfect stage. The timing was no accident. Choosing Mother's Day wasn't a cruel coincidence, but a calculated decision. Marcus saw the day as symbolic, a moment when his mother was publicly honored. a day she had always cherished. By committing the act during the service, he forced the community to confront the secrets she had hidden, exposing what he believed was her ultimate betrayal. Psychologists who later reviewed the case described Marcus's mindset as a mix of psychosis and deep-seated resentment. His mental illness distorted reality, twisting his pain and anger into a dangerous conviction. The church, a place of worship and comfort for most, became the site of his final and violent statement. The Facebook live stream added another layer to the tragedy. Marcus wanted the world to see what he considered the truth. He wanted witnesses, not just the small congregation but hundreds online, to understand what he saw as a revelation. The live stream ensured that no one could ignore what he did. No one could pretend it hadn't happened. In the aftermath, many struggled to comprehend the full weight of what had been lost. The service, meant to celebrate life and love, had become a brutal reminder of pain and broken trust. Marcus's act shattered the town's sense of safety and forced a community to face uncomfortable questions about secrets, mental health, and the fine line between love and destruction. In the weeks and months after the tragedy, Elmsbrook struggled to heal. The small town, once known for its quiet streets and close-knit community, was now marked by the shadow of what happened inside New Hope Baptist Church. The church itself closed temporarily, its doors shuttered as the sanctuary became a crime scene and then a place of mourning. Counseling services were offered to residents, and vigils were held to honor Marlene's memory and support those left behind. But for many, the pain ran deep and complicated. Marcus Hensley's trial became a focal point for the town and the media. As prosecutors laid out the evidence, the DNA revelation, the journals, the premeditation, the defense focused on his mental health struggles. Experts testified about Marcus's psychosis and emotional instability, painting a picture of a young man trapped in a spiraling nightmare. The court heard about his paranoia, delusions, and how the weight of his family's hidden past broke down his ability to reason. The trial was emotionally draining for everyone involved, especially for the congregation members who had witnessed the murder firsthand. Many struggled to reconcile the quiet boy they thought they knew with the man who had taken his mother's life. The community was forced to confront difficult questions about mental illness, the stigma surrounding it, and the support systems that might have been missing. Outside the courtroom, the Facebook Live video that captured the crime continued to circulate despite efforts to remove it. Families of those who had watched the stream shared stories of trauma, some saying it had changed their lives forever. Social media platforms faced criticism for how such violent content could spread so quickly, raising urgent discussions about regulation and responsibility in the digital age. Marlene's story, once hidden, became a symbol of sacrifice and secrecy. Many in Elmsbrook began to understand the heavy burden she carried, not just as a mother protecting her son, but as a woman haunted by a past she could never fully escape. Her life reminded people that sometimes, even the strongest facades conceal deep pain. Marcus was ultimately convicted, but received a sentence that reflected his mental health diagnosis. He was committed to a secure psychiatric facility where he remains under supervision. While justice was served in the legal sense, the emotional wounds for the town, and for Marcus himself, remain open. Son kills mom in a church service streaming on Facebook Live is a story that shocks and challenges viewers to look beyond the surface. It's a tragic reminder of how secrets, mental illness, and a desperate search for identity can collide with devastating consequences. He became convinced that she saw him as a burden, a reminder of something shameful. The more he dwelled on it, the more twisted his thinking became. He believed that by confronting her, by exposing her secret, he could reclaim his identity. But at some point, that desire shifted into something more dangerous. He began writing about cleansing the lie, about taking back the bloodline. To those reading his journals now, it was clear Marcus wasn't just unraveling, he was planning. Quietly, methodically, and with a belief that the truth, his truth, could only be revealed through something irreversible. As investigators followed the trail of Marcus's mental decline, more disturbing truths about Marlene's past began to surface. She had lived in Elmsbrook for over 20 years, but her life before that was a mystery to most. There were no close relatives nearby, no childhood friends who visited, and no old photos displayed in the house. When authorities dug deeper into public records, they discovered that Marlene Hensley hadn't always been Marlene Hensley. Her original name was Angela Porter. In 2003, shortly after Warren Langston was arrested for murder, Angela Porter changed her name, moved states, and started over. She left Alabama with her infant son and settled in Georgia under her new identity. The documents found hidden in a locked drawer in her bedroom included court papers from Langston's trial, a restraining order filed in 2002, and a signed name change certificate. There were also several letters, some unopened, some half-burned, sent from prison. All were from Langston, and all addressed to her and Marcus. None had ever been shared with her son. The letters revealed a disturbing relationship. Warren Langston had been controlling, abusive, and violent long before his final crime. Angela had fled not just to protect her son from Langston's legacy, but possibly from Langston himself. By changing their names and cutting all ties, she believed she could give Marcus a chance at a normal life. She raised him quietly, never speaking of the past, never telling him the truth about who his father really was. To those who knew her, this revelation was devastating.